Alistair Finch, his 73 years etched into the deep lines around his perpetually narrowed eyes and the permanent slump of his shoulders, was a man consumed by the melancholic hues of cynicism and faded glory. His name, once proudly displayed on the spine of countless whimsical children's books, had long since receded into the dusty archives of local libraries and the nostalgic, hushed whispers of a bygone generation. For 5 decades, he had been a conjurer of worlds, talking animals with earnest eyes, enchanted forests that pulsed with unseen magic, and intrepid young heroes whose courage always triumphed. His studio, a sprawling, ramshackle extension tacked onto his secluded cottage, nestled deep within the whispering embrace of the Adirondack foothills, had once been the vibrant crucible of his boundless imagination. Now, it was a mausoleum of lost inspiration, rolls of yellowed, brittle canvases slumped haphazardly in forgotten corners, tubes of paint hardened into brittle, fossilized remnants of once vibrant dreams, brushes stiff and unyielding with the accumulated grime of forgotten pigments and the pervasive, cloying scent of stale turpentine mingling with the thick, suffocating dust of disuse. Alistair lived in self-imposed exile, a hermit from a world he felt had irrevocably lost its spark, its capacity for wonder, its appreciation for true artistry, and most certainly, its very last vestiges of magic. The boundless, exuberant imagination that had once flowed effortlessly onto his pages had withered and died, he believed, with the passing of his beloved wife, Eleanor, 20 long years prior. Eleanor had been more than just his partner, she was his vibrant muse, her laughter the soundtrack to his creative process, her insightful critiques the compass that guided his artistic hand. She was the brilliant counterpoint to his own introverted, often brooding nature. Her absence had not merely extinguished his joy, it had, he was convinced, irrevocably severed his connection to the very wellspring of his creativity. His once keen eye for detail had grown dim, his hand unsteady. He'd become a caricature of his former self, gruff, reclusive, his few, reluctant interactions with the outside world limited to grudging, hurried trips for basic supplies and the curt dismissal of any hopeful, misguided art students who dared to venture up his winding, overgrown driveway in search of his faded wisdom. He clung to the bitter belief that magic, like his own artistic talent, had simply ceased to exist, swallowed whole by a cynical, monochrome world that valued algorithms over artistry, profit over passion. His cottage, a quaint but profoundly neglected relic from a bygone era, served as a stark, tangible reflection of his internal state. Parts of it, particularly the sun-drenched, south-facing porch, still held a lingering charm, but most rooms were a testament to comfortable disarray, bordering on hoarding. Bookshelves overflowed, not with orderly volumes, but with precarious, haphazard stacks of old reference materials, half-read novels with dog-eared pages, and discarded sketchbooks filled with angry, unfinished scrawls. The kitchen, with its chipped ceramic sink and an ancient, stubbornly functional stove, was rarely used for anything beyond the preparation of instant coffee and the occasional, prepackaged, microwaved meal. The studio, however, was the true heart of the neglect, a labyrinthine jumble of easels draped with faded cloths, jars filled with bone-dry brushes, and light-stained windows gazing out at the encroaching, untamed forest that seemed to press in on all sides. Alistair cherished the profound silence, the predictable, unchanging rhythm of his solitude, the unchallenging, undemanding company of his own thoughts. It was a perfectly still pool, reflecting only the past. It was a crisp, late spring afternoon, the air thick with the invigorating scent of pine needles, damp earth, and the lingering promise of rain after a refreshing morning shower, when the carefully cultivated stillness of Alistair's world was not merely disturbed, but quite literally repainted. He had, in a fleeting, rare moment of optimistic folly, left a fresh, meticulously primed canvas resting on a low easel near an open studio window. Beside it, on a worn wooden stool, sat a pristine glass palette loaded with vibrant, newly squeezed tubes of acrylics: cadmium yellow, cerulean blue, alizarin crimson, titanium white. It had been a sudden, almost defiant urge to try again, a momentary lapse in his self-imposed artistic dormancy. He'd stepped out, muttering to himself, to fetch a fresh pot of steaming chamomile tea from the kitchen, the herbaceous scent briefly cutting through the pervasive odor of stale turpentine. He returned, moments later, to a sight that made his teacup clatter against its saucer, threatening to spill its contents onto the already precarious stack of unsorted mail. There, amidst his antique easels, the scattered art supplies, and the carefully placed drop cloths, was a small, sooty bundle of fur. It wasn't a sleek, opportunistic fox, nor a nimble squirrel, nor even the occasional inquisitive raccoon. It was a bear cub, no bigger than a sturdy, medium-sized dog, its fur a rich, glossy brown, still slightly damp from the morning's rain. But what truly snatched Alistair's breath, freezing him in the doorway, was its chest, a distinctive splash of bright, almost luminous white fur, shaped uncannily like a painter's palette or a clumsy, deliberate brushstroke. It was perched precariously on his favorite, if somewhat wobbly, studio stool, one enormous, clumsy paw splayed across his fresh, primed canvas, its nose buried deep within an open tube of cadmium yellow paint, the vibrant color already smeared across its muzzle. It looked up, bright yellow streaks across its whiskers and around its intelligent, dark eyes, wide with a startling mixture of raw curiosity, pure, uninhibited delight, and an almost comical, self-satisfied pride. It let out a soft, questioning umrof, a sound that was more kitten than bear, more query than growl, as if earnestly asking for Alistair's critical feedback on its burgeoning masterpiece. Scattered around it, like spilled jewels, were tubes of paint, some neatly squeezed out, others chewed, still more lying crushed and oozing, creating a vibrant, chaotic, abstract explosion of color across his pristine wooden floor. The canvas, intended for a serene Adirondack landscape, now bore a swirling, impressionistic smear of yellow, red, and blue, a chaotic yet undeniable beginning of something entirely new. Alistair Finch, a man whose voice rarely rose above a cynical murmur, a low grumble of discontent, let out a sound somewhere between a choked gasp and an incredulous wheeze. A bear? In his studio. Not just any bear, but one seemingly engaged in an act of painting. The sheer audacity of the situation, the utter violation of his carefully maintained state of artistic dormancy, the complete destruction of his carefully planned return to order, momentarily stunned him into silence. His first, rational, artist-turned-grumpy recluse thought was a surge of pure, unadulterated fury: grab the nearest broom, shoo the creature out with furious swipes, then assess the monumental, sticky damage. But then the cub let out another umrof rumble, a deeply resonant, happy complaint that vibrated through the very floorboards and resonated deep within Alistair's bones, demanding not just attention, but perhaps more paint. It looked less destructive and more profoundly an artist. An utterly uninhibited, joyfully messy, utterly confident artist. And very, very pleased with its own audacious work. Against every ingrained instinct he possessed, against every cynical thought that had governed his life for decades, Alistair felt a slow, undeniable tremor begin in his chest. A small, involuntary smile, rusty from disuse, began to tug at his lips. he named him Palette, a fitting, if slightly ironic, tribute to his new, furry, utterly charming, and entirely problematic studio assistant. The initial days of Palette's unexpected residency were nothing short of a full-scale assault on Alistair's meticulously maintained order. Palette was not injured, merely orphaned, profoundly and perpetually hungry, and bursting with an insatiable, untamed curiosity that extended particularly to anything colorful, shiny, or arrangeable. Alistair, whose hands were accustomed to the delicate strokes of a sable brush and the crisp, precise turning of a book page, now found himself awkwardly mixing specialized formula for bear cubs, consulting hastily downloaded guides on his ancient, wheezing desktop computer, his usually formal posture often bent at an uncomfortable angle over a steaming bowl of mush. He quickly, if reluctantly, learned to recognize Palette's incessant mrof as a multi-purpose demand for food, for attention, for play, or perhaps just a general, deeply felt commentary on the deplorable lack of artistic inspiration in the moment. He began leaving out bowls of wild berries and nuts collected from the forest edge, observing with a mixture of exasperation and grudging fascination as Palette devoured them with astonishing gusto, leaving an inevitable, sticky trail of crumbs, sweet juice, and adorable, often brightly colored, paw prints across his once immaculate floors. But then the cub let out another rumble, a deeply resonant, happy complaint that vibrated through the very floorboards and resonated deep within Alistair's bones, demanding not just attention, but perhaps more paint. It looked less destructive and more profoundly an artist. An utterly uninhibited, joyfully messy, utterly confident artist. And very, very pleased with its own audacious work. Against every ingrained instinct he possessed, against every cynical thought that had governed his life for decades, Alistair felt a slow, undeniable tremor begin in his chest. A small, involuntary smile, rusty from disuse, began to tug at his lips. He named him Palette, a fitting, if slightly ironic, tribute to his new, furry, utterly charming, and entirely problematic studio assistant. The initial days of Palette's unexpected residency were nothing short of a full-scale assault on Alistair's meticulously maintained order. Palette was not injured, merely orphaned, profoundly and perpetually hungry, and bursting with an insatiable, untamed curiosity that extended particularly to anything colorful, shiny, or arrangeable. Alistair, whose hands were accustomed to the delicate strokes of a sable brush and the crisp, precise turning of a book page, now found himself awkwardly mixing specialized formula for bear cubs, consulting hastily downloaded guides on his ancient, wheezing desktop computer, his usually formal posture often bent at an uncomfortable angle over a steaming bowl of mush. He quickly, if reluctantly, learned to recognize Palette's incessant mrof as a multi-purpose demand for food, for attention, for play, or perhaps just a general, deeply felt commentary on the deplorable lack of artistic inspiration in the moment. He began leaving out bowls of wild berries and nuts collected from the forest edge, observing with a mixture of exasperation and grudging fascination as Palette devoured them with astonishing gusto, leaving an inevitable, sticky trail of crumbs, sweet juice, and adorable, often brightly colored, paw prints across his once immaculate floors. She'd walk in to find Palette wrestling with a tube of paint, or attempting to arrange a pile of discarded charcoal sticks into an abstract pattern, his tongue poking out in concentration. Lily, initially shocked and bewildered, then utterly fascinated, began to capture these chaotic, vibrant moments on her phone, her camera roll filling with images of a bear cub covered in paint. "Grandpa," she'd say, a genuine, joyful smile lighting her face, "he's like a living, breathing abstract expressionist." "This is incredible." Alistair would merely grunt, a dismissive sound, but he'd watch her, a flicker of something almost like pride, or perhaps just a nascent, unacknowledged wonder, in his eyes. He found himself sketching again, not the detailed, precise whimsy of his past, but loose, expressive charcoal studies of Pallet's chaotic artistry, capturing the raw energy of the cub's movements. The palpable presence of the cub began to loosen his decades-old creative block, chipping away, slowly but surely, at the thick, cynical calcification that had surrounded his heart. As the weeks turned into a vibrant, humid summer, Pallet grew stronger, more robust, his huffs and grunts becoming more assertive, his waddles more confident, his clumsy charm evolving into a more deliberate, mischievous artistry. His artistic endeavors grew bolder, more ambitious. He discovered the joys of watercolors, leaving trails of luminous, transparent paw prints across the linoleum, like ghost paintings. He developed an almost scientific obsession with natural elements, meticulously collecting fallen leaves, smooth river pebbles, iridescent beetle wings, and shimmering mica flakes, which he would then meticulously arrange into surprisingly intricate mandalas on the studio floor, a primal, innate sense of composition guiding his paws. He even attempted to hold a paintbrush clumsily in his mouth, smudging charcoal onto large sheets of paper, leaving abstract, gestural marks that, to Alistair's astonished and increasingly fascinated eye, possessed a raw, undeniable energy, a pure, uninhibited creativity that he had thought lost forever. The Mural of Moss and Mud was a particularly memorable piece, a true testament to Pallet's evolving artistic vision. Pallet, having spent a long, satisfying morning in the deep, damp forest, returned to the studio with his thick fur thoroughly coated in rich, dark earth and vibrant green moss. Instead of merely tracking it indoors, he proceeded to paint a swirling, textured mural on one of Alistair's larger, blank canvases, a piece that Alistair had deliberately left in the cub's reach, a test, perhaps. Pallet used his entire body as a brush, rolling and rubbing against the canvas, creating an organic, earthy masterpiece that smelled faintly of pine and damp soil. Alistair, watching the scene unfold, didn't scold. He didn't even sigh. He simply grabbed his own sketchbook and quickly, feverishly, captured the fleeting creation, a genuine, unforced smile broadening across his face. He even took a small, careful sample of the unique paint to analyze its earthy pigments. The summer was punctuated by new, more significant challenges beyond mere mischief. Pallet, in his artistic zeal, once got a paw stuck in an old, hardened paint can that Alistair had foolishly left within reach, requiring Ranger Ben's patient assistance to carefully free him, a moment of acute stress and genuine fear for Alistair. Another time, drawn by the vibrant hues, he ingested a small amount of non-toxic but unpleasant watercolor, leading to a few days of gentle discomfort, frequent trips outside, and Alistair's frantic worrying, again, turning to Ranger Ben and Dr. Anya Sharma for remote guidance and reassurance. These incidents, far from deterring Alistair, only deepened his bond with Pallet, revealing a fierce, almost primal protectiveness he hadn't felt since Leo's accident, a love that transcended even his long-held grief for Eleanor. He found himself rearranging his studio to prioritize Pallet's safety, not just his own convenience. Lily's visits became not just frequent, but truly essential. The strained awkwardness between grandfather and granddaughter had completely vanished. She wasn't just observing Pallet, she was learning from him, from his uninhibited joy in creation, his magnificent disregard for rules, his fearless exploration of color. She saw the profound, almost miraculous change in her grandfather, the way his eyes, once dull, now twinkled with a renewed light, the way his hands, once stiff and hesitant, now moved with a new fluidity as he sketched Pallet's antics. She witnessed Alistair talking to Pallet, recounting passages from his old children's books, or murmuring critiques of Pallet's latest installations with an almost paternal pride. He even confessed to Lily the long-buried story of his brother, Leo, the accident, and his decades-long struggle with guilt and the desperate need for control that had shaped his entire adult life. The simple, non-judgmental presence of Pallet and Lily's quiet, empathetic understanding helped him to finally begin processing the long-buried pain and self-recrimination. Lily, in turn, found her own artistic voice, abandoning her rigid academic training for looser, more intuitive forms, inspired by Pallet's freeform expression. She helped Alistair design cub-proof storage for the vast array of paints, turning his chaotic studio into a functional, vibrant art haven, a place of shared creation. The local town, initially bewildered, slowly became fascinated. The Havenwood Gazette, a small, weekly paper, ran a quirky story titled, "Reclusive Artist Finds New Muse in Unexpected Furry Friend," complete with Lily's grainy photos of Pallet. Tourists began to detour, hoping for a glimpse of the painting bear. While most respected Alistair's privacy, a few overzealous individuals tried to approach the cottage, hoping to take photos or, worse, offer Pallet treats, often unhealthy ones. This forced Alistair to become fiercely protective, installing "no trespassing" signs and occasionally shooing away unwelcome visitors with a surprising, newfound vehemence. This external pressure, while annoying, solidified his resolve to protect Pallet, even from the well-meaning but ignorant public. As autumn painted the Adirondacks in fiery reds, burnished golds, and deep rusts, Pallet, now a sturdy juvenile, was nearly as tall as Alistair when standing on his hind legs. His wild instincts were becoming undeniably pronounced. He spent long stretches gazing out the windows, his powerful nose twitching at distant scents of wild berries, migrating deer, and other bears. His art began to incorporate more natural elements and less human-made paint, though he still cherished a good tube of cadmium yellow. He would rearrange fallen leaves into intricate, fleeting patterns on the forest floor near the cottage, or rub tree sap onto bark to create shimmering, abstract designs. He spent more time exploring the perimeter of the cottage, venturing further into the bordering woods. The inevitable, heartbreaking conversation with Ranger Ben arrived one crisp, late autumn afternoon. "He's reaching the optimal age, Mr. Finch," Ben said gently, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on Pallet, who was meticulously arranging a collection of colorful fallen leaves into a spiral pattern on the porch, a tiny, natural vortex of color. "His natural instincts are strong. We've got a window now, before he becomes too habituated, too dependent on human interaction for his survival. It's time to help him find his own way, to rejoin his kind." The phrase, "too habituated," felt like a cruel irony, given how much Pallet had habituated Alistair to joy, to life, to art. Alistair fought the powerful urge to argue, to find a loophole, to plead for more time. But he saw the truth in Ben's eyes, and in Pallet's restless energy. His deep, profound love for Pallet meant letting him go. He acknowledged the truth with a simple, choked nod. He spent Pallet's last 2 weeks showering him with his favorite treats, sketching him incessantly, capturing every last gesture, every playful grunt. He let Pallet help with chores, or rather, supervised his chaotic attempts at chores, and even designated a special, Pallet's library, of old, non-valuable art books for his destructive chewing pleasure. The pain of the looming separation was a constant, dull ache, a heavy weight in his chest, but beneath it, a new strength had blossomed, forged in the fires of unexpected love and a profoundly rekindled creativity. He felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known in decades. The morning of Pallet's release was brutally cold, the very air sharp with the biting promise of true winter, but tinged with the nostalgic scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The first dusting of snow lay like a pristine white canvas over the forest floor. Ranger Ben arrived before true dawn, his heavy-duty park truck equipped with a large, specially designed carrier for transporting wildlife. Alistair, his heart a raw, open wound, carried a large, overflowing basket filled with Pallet's favorite wild treats, extra wild berries gathered by Lily, plump nuts, and even a small, jam-smeared piece of sourdough bread, a final, nostalgic nod to his first, famous act of culinary rebellion. They drove deep into a secluded, densely forested area, miles from any human settlement, a place Ranger Ben assured him was ideal for a bear's reintroduction, with abundant food sources and an existing, healthy, wild bear population, far from human interference. Alistair knelt on the damp forest floor, the chill seeping into his bones, his hands trembling slightly as he unlatched the carrier and opened the basket. Pallet, sensing the vastness of the forest stretching out before him, the profound freedom, paused. He looked at Alistair with those intelligent, mischievous eyes, his large nose twitching as he took in the complex tapestry of scents that comprised true wilderness, the musk of deer, the sharp tang of pine, the damp earth underfoot. He took a tentative bite of the jam bread, savoring the sweetness, then looked back at Alistair one last time with a soft, questioning rumph that tugged at Alistair's very soul, a silent farewell. "Be safe, my dear Pallet," Alistair whispered, stroking his thick, healthy fur one last time, his voice thick with unaccustomed emotion, tears blurring his vision. "Be wild. Be free. Paint your own masterpieces out here. Let your spirit soar." Pallet finished the bread, licked his muzzle with a final, deeply contented rumph, then, with a surprising burst of speed that belied his stocky form, ambled into the trees, his body melting into the shadows of the dense undergrowth as gracefully as a phantom. He didn't look back. Alistair watched until he was utterly, irrevocably gone, swallowed by the boundless green, the profound quiet of the forest settling over him like a heavy shroud. The silence that descended was deafening, cold and vast like the winter landscape, but beneath it, deep in the hollow ache of his chest, Alistair felt an echo of profound warmth, a vibrant memory. He stood there for a long time, the emptiness in his arms echoing the hollow space that had resided in his heart for years, a space now filled to overflowing with the vivid, colorful memory of two small, mischievous, artistically inclined bears. Ranger Ben, quietly, respectfully, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, saying nothing, but his presence was a quiet, understanding comfort. The cottage was, once again, quiet. The scattered paint tubes had been cleaned and put away, the canvases stored, the old typewriter covered. But it wasn't the same. Alistair still lived alone, but his studio was no longer a mausoleum. It was a vibrant, lived-in space, humming with a new, creative energy. He was sketching again, his hand moving with a newfound fluidity and confidence, incorporating the abstract patterns, the organic textures, and the wild, uninhibited joy that Pallet had shown him. He painted sweeping, colorful landscapes that hummed with a new energy, infused with the untamed spirit of the wild. He revisited old, unfinished projects, imbuing them with a freshness they had lacked. He even began earnest work on a new children's book, its central character a mischievous, color-loving bear who left behind beautiful, unexpected art wherever he went. The process was slow, painstaking, but filled with a profound joy he hadn't known in decades. Lily, his granddaughter, became his confidant and his closest collaborator, helping him digitize his old sketches, offering fresh perspectives on his new, wild-inspired work, and even contributing some of her own interpretations of Pallet's art. Their relationship, once strained by unspoken grief and cynicism, blossomed into a deep, shared artistic journey, a bond forged anew by a bear cub. His bitterness, once a constant companion, softened, replaced by a quiet, pervasive joy. He found himself spending hours in the forest, not just observing as a detached artist, but truly seeing the patterns in nature, the vibrant colors of moss on bark, the intricate designs of fallen leaves, the swirling currents in a stream. He saw Pallet's influence everywhere, a living, breathing gallery. And sometimes, hidden amongst the ancient trees, deep in the untouched parts of the forest, he would find small, inexplicable installations, a perfectly arranged spiral of multicolored pebbles on a smooth rock, a unique, almost painterly smear of tree sap on a boulder, or even a branch draped with a surprisingly aesthetic collection of brightly colored lichen arranged with a deliberate, artistic touch. He'd smile, a genuine, unburdened smile, a warmth spreading through his chest, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He knew. He knew Pallet was out there, still painting, still bringing color and wonder to the world, leaving his own unique mark on the vast, wild canvas of nature. Alistair continued to paint, his work gaining a new depth, a raw, primal energy that resonated with art critics and captivated new generations of children. He became a quiet advocate for wildlife, donating a portion of his book sales to conservation efforts, subtly incorporating messages of wild beauty and respectful coexistence into his new stories. His past guilt and grief were not erased, but integrated into a newfound strength and wisdom. He understood now that true art, like true magic, wasn't about control or critical success, but about uninhibited creation, about embracing the wild, beautiful chaos of life, and about the profound, unexpected connections that paint our world in the most vibrant hues. The shadows of his past had receded, replaced by the vibrant, echoing presence of the wild, and the indelible paw prints that an artistic bear cub had left, not just on his canvases, but irrevocably, beautifully, on his soul.